Hello, welcome to BIZ, a weekly television program of international, regional, and domestic events and a casual business talk. Today we are at the Thai Journalists Association to attend a lecture by Associate Professor Hernando Rojas from School of Journalism and Mass Communication, University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is now a visiting fellow at the university in Singapore. He was invited here by Burapha University in Bang San, Chonburi, to give a lecture as the TJA. His topic is media and political polarization. So now let's join me at his lecture.
BIZ Overview.
The lecture on media and political polarization is jointly organized by Thai Journalists Association or TJA and Burapha University, located in Chonburi Province at TJA building on Sam Sen Road. It is opened by Padit Reungdit, President of TJA, and Ajahn Sariya Viriyo Sutikun, Vice Dean for Education Quality Assurance Affairs, Faculty of Political Science and Law, Burapha University. Then, Associate Professor Hernando Rojas takes the floor to give his presentation. He specializes in media and social mobilization. He said, currently, 40% of the global population has access to the internet, while almost everyone in the world has a cell phone now. Therefore, cell phones will soon become the main device of people in accessing the internet. This leads to the popularity of social network sites, particularly among young people. In Thailand, for instance, there are 18 million accounts of Facebook, ranking number 13 among 212 countries and territories in the survey. This shows that Thai people are quite active on Facebook. In Associate Professor Rojas' study, it shows that people tend to see more conflict or violence in news stories than they actually are. And people who receive online news tend to perceive that the society is more polarized than people who get news from traditional media. These are interesting findings, and he will explain in my interview. He will also suggest solutions to this phenomenon. You can see that Associate Professor Rojas gave a very interesting lecture at TJA. In the BIZ chat, I will discuss with him more on his content of his presentation. So now let's join me in the BIZ chat.
BIZ Chat.
Hello, Professor Rojas. Thanks for joining our program on the BIZ. Could I ask you by starting telling us a bit, what do you teach at the University of Wisconsin-Madison?
Hi, well, it's a pleasure being here. I'm in the Journalism and Mass Communication School in Wisconsin, and I teach classes in international communication, political communication, new media, and journalism.
And what brings you here to Bangkok, Thailand?
Well, I've spent the last semester in Singapore. I was on sabbatical in Wisconsin, and I came to Singapore, and I was a visiting professor at NTU in Singapore. And I had some Thai former students who invited me to come to Thailand, and I've spent some days in Chiang Mai, gave some talks there at the University of Chiang Mai, and now I'm here giving some talks at Burapha University.
You give a presentation today at the Thai Journalists Association, with also in this lecture also in collaboration with the Burapha University. And your topic is media and political polarization. Could you tell us a bit to trying to recap your presentation earlier? What have you said? Yeah, your
Okay.
presentation.
Absolutely. Well, new communication technologies have changed dramatically the way we live our lives, from the way we work, the way we go to work, the way we consume information, the way we relate to other people. And of course, it's not surprising then that it also changes the way in which we interact with media. It used to be that media consumers would probably have a newspaper that they were subscribed to, or they would watch their favorite television station, and that's the way that they would relate with news. But that tends to be no longer the case. Nowadays, in the new media environment, a lot of the distribution of news happens through our social networks. So we start being exposed to news because our friends send us links to different information, a different point of view, different outlets. And so this begs the question of whether, because we might start self-selecting, that is, only talking to people that think like us, is it possible then that media in this new environment tend to make us more polarized as a society? That is, do they sort of separate us? If I'm only talking to people that think like me, and other people are only talking to people that think like them, it could be that the distance between us and them actually grows. So we started studying whether media and new media in particular would actually result in people being more polarized about issues. We've conducted now a series of studies on this, looking at actual polarization. So are people more polarized because they consume media? And the answer is, in most countries, that's not the case. It's not that media consumption makes us more polarized. However, and this is the other side of the coin, however, we do find that media consumption makes us think the world is a more polarized place to live in, particularly people who receive news from the internet. So people who receive news from the internet are much more likely to think that their country is a more polarized country. And this is systematically. We've already done this study in 10 countries. And in 9 out of the 10 countries, people who look at news online think that their country is more polarized.
And in your presentation, you also mentioned about that in the near future, probably people will access the internet through the mobile phone more. Are you saying that is it possible that mobile phone will become more important to run PC or other mobile devices?
I think you're absolutely right in terms of, mobile devices are the future of our connectivity. As of today, one would say it's the mobile phone, because that's sort of the emerging leader in internet access and interactivity among people. But some people say, does it have to be the cell phone? Maybe not. Maybe it's not. So there's now people who are producing clothes that have interactivity capacity. So there's a Levi's jacket that lets you interact with music. Google soon will be having their Google glasses that will let us interact with information. Some people talk about watches, wristwatches that could also have internet capabilities. And there's all kinds of objects in the house that could also be connected among themselves and also connected to computers and to mobile phones. So potentially the mobile phone will be the most important of those tools, but I emphasize it's the mobility that matters. So it's information, access to information and connectivity that we carry everywhere we go, and it might be even in our clothes, not necessarily in a phone.
Yeah, and the devices you mentioned, the cloth, the watch, the glasses, would that also allow you to access information? News story?
Absolutely. So you can use your cell phone to read the news. You can use your iPad to read the news, but you can also read the news. According to what we've heard so far of Google Glasses, you can also read the news directly on your screen. And so
on the glass,
exactly. Or you could
still
project,
have to imagine, yeah.
Absolutely. or as in an MIT prototype called the Sixth Sense, you would actually project onto any surface, including your hand, if need be.
I don't know whether that would be good thing or bad thing to happen to our society in the world.
Well, that's a good question. Like most things, it'll have some good things and it'll have some bad things.
In your presentation, you have a term that really struck me. You said that this will be a decade of augmented reality. Could you explain to us what you mean by that term?
Yes. Well, people who look at technology and how technology changes are starting to talk about these 10-year cycles. And so we went from mainframes to personal computers, from personal computers to mobile phones. And so, well, what would characterize the decade that we are in? And I think that this is a label that was not created by me. Some people talk about this idea of augmented reality. It's basically living your everyday life that becomes enhanced by the access you have to information, real-time information. You're making a purchase and you're able to access information about the product that you're purchasing. Or you're talking to someone and you're able to see, I'm talking right here to you and I might be able to see your information on Facebook and I might be able to read what you've posted about certain topics. And so I have information and connections that are accessible to me all the time. And that's what people refer to augmented reality, because it's not like the old metaphor of the internet where it was a place that you went to, right? And you went to the cyber world and people had an identity in the cyber world. That's no longer the case. It's about your everyday life. It's about taking the transportation and being connected to people and being connected to information.
By that, it seems that people will kind of be able to access information all the time, in every single second of daily life. And is there any study or maybe your comment on whether that is good or bad to a human being?
Well, that's an important question, because some people start to worry about what they call information overload. So yes, I can have hundreds and hundreds of bits of information, but can I process them? Can I really make sense of them? And so I say it depends on two things. So information by itself is not enough, because I need to be able to make sense of information. And so I think that there's a very important role for media and journalists and editors of information, which is making sense for people of all the information that is out there. Now, having said that, that making sense process might be somewhat automatized, as it happens today. So for example, I'm searching for a hotel, and I do it online, and I get different prices, and I can compare. But I also get the reviewers of people who have stayed in that hotel, and they tell me, and they review the hotel for me. So in a way, we already have that information available. Now, these technologies will make it easier for us to access that information at all times. Whether that's good or bad, I think it's an open question. Some people suggest that people who are immersed in these technologies are becoming quicker at making decisions. So if you studies that look at the MRIs of the brain and brain patterns, so children that play a lot of video games start to become quicker at a response, being able to produce responses. Now, if we think quick is good, the answer is then this is good. But is quick good? Not necessarily. And so it's something that we have to think about very carefully.
It looks like a journalist have to become more versatile and then in different skill. Professor Rojas will stay with us for the next break of Big Chat.
BIZ Chat.
So, Professor Rojas, in your research, you said that people who receive news from online media tend to perceive that the society is more polarized than people who receive news from the traditional media. Could you explain to us why is that?
Okay, well, yes, as you're pointing out, in 10 studies that we've done in different countries, we find that pattern in which internet news leads you to believe that you're in a more polarized society. So one of the points I was making during my presentation is, in most countries, being exposed to media doesn't make you more polarized, but it makes you think that your country is more polarized. The explanation that we have thought about for this phenomena is that it relates to how news are distributed in the new media environment. So it used to be that you would subscribe to a newspaper and you would read the information from that newspaper, or you would watch a television show, the newscast that you liked, and you would watch the entirety of that newscast. Nowadays, we start to get more and more information from our friends. And so I'm from a generation that I still have the habit of in the morning, I sit down, I take my iPad and I read the newspaper, the traditional newspaper, but it's online version. But increasingly, more and more of my students tell me things like, I don't need to read the newspaper because when something happens, I found out via Facebook. And what this means ultimately is that most of the information is now being distributed to us by our social networks. And so we think that in that process of that change of a direct relationship to the media outlet, to have this new actor, which is my friends, my social network, I think what starts happening is that my friends tend to forward to me news that contains extreme examples of things. And so probably if we're in a country, let's say, where there's some liberal versus conservative divide, and I am a liberal, many of my friends will also be liberal, and they will only probably send me conservative news when it's very, very radical points of view. That's when they send it to me. And so I start to think that all conservatives are that radical, or vice versa. If I were a conservative, then when in reality, there are many conservatives that have many more moderate positions, but because of the new distribution system, I don't see those. I only see the extremely radical ones on all sides. And so we think that's what explains this phenomena of an increased perception of polarization.
And how would you suggest our society deal with that kind of phenomenon?
Well, it's complicated because those are our social networks, and our society is not going to change our social networks. We make those relationships. It's people that we have friended over our whole lives. It's co-workers. And so in a way, those are kind of a given. Of course, we make decisions about who is our friend and who is not our friend. But once we've made that decision, this person starts to be part of our social network. Now, what I think then, as journalists, we need to be aware of those new distribution mechanisms. And we have to be aware of how what we're saying is going to be perceived by people that do not share our beliefs. And I think if in that process, we end up, well, number one, doing better journalism, and number two, potentially moderating these perceptions of polarization. I'll give you an example of this. In my Facebook account, I have 600 contacts. Some of these are people I went to high school with. Others I've met during the course of my life. And many of these think differently than I do, support issues that I do not support. But they're my friends. I know them. I don't want to finish the relationship with them. And so what happens to me is that if I'm going to post something on Facebook, I think a lot about it, because I want it to be a statement that I'm happy, comfortable with friends who will not agree with it and friends who will agree with it. And so I think that through this added layer of reflexivity, if I think more about what I'm going to say, I'm probably able to convey a more centered message. And I think in that same fashion, journalists need to think about, well, not only how well did I craft this product, this news, but how is it going to be interpreted by my audience? And thinking about how the audience interprets it might make it into more balanced, better journalism.
But I think I believe that in your presentation, when you say that you analyze content in the media, they are not as polarized as people have conceived, so
yes,
maybe they are not really that.
That's one of the things that we found is that it's most people when they're listening or watching or reading newspapers, tend to focus more on the parts of the argument that does not support their view, and they tend to start thinking, oh, this whole newspaper or this journalist or this chain is against my views. When in reality, the journalist might be providing 2 or 3 arguments that support your view and 2 or 3 arguments that do not support your view. And so we tend to focus more on the arguments that do not support our views. Now, we might say, well, that's part of psychological defense mechanism, but it's something that journalists need to take into account. And that is, we don't know enough, and this is an area of research that interests me now, and I'm trying to develop, which is, okay, so if people tend to perceive journalists as biased against them, even if it's not, so how can we combat this? How can we reduce these perceptions of hostility? And the answer is, we don't know yet.
Yeah, because I think I remember you said in the presentation that the media people are not really doing a bad job. That they're doing quite okay. But it's mainly the perception of the people.
So I'll say it this way. Of course, there's differing media standards in the world. There are media systems that are more solid than others. But I tend to think that people in any country think their media is worse than it actually is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's true. And you also mentioned a bit about media literacy. You know, if people are told about how media operate, there might become the perception might change. They might not see the society as polarized.
Well, this goes back to a study I did with some colleagues at Wisconsin, in which we said, okay, so could it be that part of the problem is that citizens sometimes may not understand what's the job of a reporter? And so we actually created what's called a news literacy, sort of teaching people about news in the same fashion in which we teach reporters and students about journalism. But this was sort of a compressed version, in which basically we were telling to people, look, a good reporter should go out and find points of view that support your argument. But they should also go and find points of view that oppose your argument. And they should present to you all sides of the story. You shouldn't complain because a journalist is presenting all sides of a story. If they're only presenting one side of a story, then you might say, well, this is not good journalism. But you shouldn't also be surprised that they present you the other side. That's their role. And what we found was that as people understood better the role of the journalist, they tended to trust more the work of the journalist and not to react with such hostility towards the work of the journalist.
Yeah. And in Thai society here, to bring into the context of the Thai society, I also have observation between whether media cause the polarization in the society, or actually the polarization is already there. The media just reflect the conflict into society, and it might, in certain state, contribute to the intensify of that polarization.
Well, that's a good observation. I mean, the first thing I have to be clear is I have not studied this phenomenon in Thailand, and so everything that I say, I preface it by this. I wouldn't be surprised that people overestimate the amount of polarization that is currently happening in Thailand. And so I'm not saying there is no polarization, but I'm saying that people might think that there is more polarization than there really is, because we've seen this in other countries, and I would suspect that it might be the same in Thailand. Now, you're absolutely right in pointing out that if a society is profoundly divided, this will also sort of reflect on media. However, having said that, if you're a good reporter, in a society that's profoundly divided, your role is to bring these people to the table, bring these ideas to the table. And so rather than contributing to a polarization by just focusing on one side of the issue, by bringing multiple sides of the issue, you might teach people about how these points of view may fit together. So I think you're right in terms of it's not that there would be just one cause for polarization, right? So there can be ethnic divides, there can be religious divides that result in polarization. Now, media then has a role to play. It can enhance that or it can reduce it. I think the role of a journalist is to reduce that polarization, not to enhance it.
Do you start to see that trend, that media start to help reduce the polarization in the society?
I have not seen that trend. What I see in the countries that I've studied is that it does not enlarge polarization. So being an habitual consumer of news does not make you more polarized. But it doesn't make you less polarized, which is what I would wish for. So I think we need that next step of not only, it's good that it doesn't enhance polarization, but it should actually decrease polarization. Right now it seems to be just keeping things as they are.
since you teach journalism, do you expect your students when they start their career, would they do the job of helping reducing the conflict in society?
I truly hope so. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Rojas, for joining the BIZ today. You might be in the US, but we hope that we will have you, to join our program in the near future. ขอบคุณมากนะครับ
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
I hope you find my interview with Associate Professor Rojas interesting and learn something from our program today. Eye on the BIZ is broadcast every Saturday from 11 to 11:30 p.m. Thanks for spending your time with us. Hope to see you again next week.